cancer diagnosis at the age of 32, my mom and I talked a lot about the shock of that diagnosis, given several doctors told us you're too young to have endometrial cancer. After much discussion, we began to feel driven to inform and help educate other young women about what symptoms they should be concerned.
Having both been teachers, it seemed natural for us to look for a way to share Alex's cancer journey in order to help other young women avoid such a shocking diagnosis or possibly navigate a similar path. A podcast seemed the best way to get the word out, and that's how Down There Aware was born.
4 years later, our mother-daughter duo has gone from educating and informing to advocacy and action, with a fresh and sometimes very interesting and somewhat humorous multi-generational perspective.
We look forward to sharing with you Season 4 as we advocate, take action, and make it a priority to always be Down There Aware.
Thanks for joining us today. We have a very special guest. Dr. Tania Small is the Global Head of Oncology Medical Affairs and Chair of R&D Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at GSK. She has built and leads an organization of medical professionals focused on patient-driven science. She's passionate about creating groundbreaking solutions that will successfully deliver transformational medicines and access mechanisms, which are needed to revolutionize both the experience and outcomes of people living with cancer and their treatment teams. A board-certified pediatric hematologist-oncologist, Dr. Small has deep experience in clinical research and drug development. She was trained in hematology oncology and bone marrow transplant at Columbia University, where she also completed a genetic research fellowship. She subsequently continued her focus on both hematology and stem cell transplant at New York Presbyterian and received several grants for her translational research in gene therapy and regenerative medicine. In previous roles with Novartis Oncology and Ipsen, Dr. Small successfully led the launch of multiple oncology therapies while overseeing programs for both clinical development and medical affairs. She has also led many patient-centered and diversity programs, working closely with the US FDA, Congress, and the American Society of Clinical Oncology to improve the diversity of enrollment in oncology clinical trials and elderly programs. Welcome, Dr. Small. Thank you so much for being here today. We're just so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you on this and all of your listeners.
Yes, and your accomplishments are just incredible, and we're so blessed that we have this opportunity, and we are grateful that you have taken the time today. So thank you so much. I wanted to get started with what made you make the shift from practicing physician to working in biopharmaceuticals?
As you spoke about my bio, you saw that I was a pediatric hematologist oncologist, and one of the things that I love about kids is just their unlimited potential of life, things that they can accomplish. And when you have a child come into your office that has cancer, and based on the medicines in your hand, the potential outcome, it's hard. And we know that medicine has changed, lives have been saved, and there's been a lot of advancement, but I still was losing patients. And it wasn't for a lack of trying to save a lot of lives, but based on the tools that you have, that's as good as you can get it. And so over time, I realized the only way that I can really help to advance medicine, the only way I can save thousands of lives, is to put my effort into helping develop the drugs that can do it. So, at one point, I remember I just got tired of losing patients. I got tired of lacking the tools and the resources. And I got tired of telling parents, I had nothing left. I got tired of telling patients' parents that I'll be coming to those funerals. And so I remember the day I just decided I want to help contribute to develop drugs that can probably save more lives. And so I never looked back. At that point, I came over to research and development and in biopharma, and to your point, what you read, we launched many drugs together. And obviously the fight is not over, but
Hmm.
I'm trying to do my part to save as many patients as I can, or contribute to their well-being and their health as best as I can.
Absolutely. Well, and I can imagine how, it's difficult for a family to go through cancer with a single person, and it's difficult for a person who's going through it themselves, and especially with children. But as a physician, to see that day in and day out with dozens of patients, one after the other, that has to be just emotionally taxing. And so, I can't imagine going through that.
You know what it is too? I mean, I think it put life in perspective for me.
Mm,
Um, because those moments where the patient leaves the clinic or leaves the hospital,
hmm
they came in with a devastating disease and they're leaving and they're thriving. I mean, to me, were my best days. And it just made me really think about how important and how fragile life is and
mm,
how you don't take any day for granted. So I think it made me respect life, respect humanity, and not, as they say, not sweat the small stuff.
yeah.
That it gave me. And even during my time in the hospital, seeing the changes, seeing the new medicines come and seeing
hmm
their impact on patients, again, that gave me hope. And that's why
hmm
I'm moving out to carry the torch. So there were happy moments, there were exciting moments, but then to your point,
Yeah.
there were always devastating moments where I wanted to, you make promises to yourself, I can never again lose a patient this way. And every time, and when I started saying it too much, that's when
hmm
the shift happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So shifting gears, now you're with GSK. Can you tell us a little bit? Are you seeing an increase in endometrial cancer in what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, to your point at GSK, a big focus of ours are the health of gynecological malignancies. And
Hmm.
um, one of the things we've been doing over the last few years is really trying to develop medicines and really understand the trends, the disease, and develop the right medicines for patients, and really try to take that personalized approach. So when we look at endometrial cancer, which is a big focus of ours, you are seeing an increase in endometrial cancer. And as you know, and as your listeners probably know, there are two different types of endometrial cancer based on
Hmm.
histology, right? Endometrioid and non-endometrioid. And particularly in the non-endometrioid cancer, we're seeing a big increase, particularly in certain patient populations.
Wow. So we understand, and we've talked about on our podcast before, but maybe you can help us understand a little bit better. Black women are diagnosed with endometrial cancer at nearly twice and have nearly twice the risk of dying as white women do. What research has identified this? Are there specific factors like environmental or genetic, that might cause disproportionate diagnoses of endometrial cancer in women of color?
So, I mean, and to your point, I mean, that data, especially over the last like 5 years, is really starting to take up. So particularly in that non-endometrioid subtype,
Hmm.
which is more aggressive and it has
Mm,
poor prognosis, we're starting to see a big increase in Black women being diagnosed and dying from endometrial cancer. And we know not even just Black women, but there's an increase in Asian women as well as Hispanic women, but particularly Black women because they actually have twice the mortality rate. And you wonder, how can a race have twice the mortality
right.
rate, right? What is there? So part of the challenge is that they have the more aggressive subtype, and what we don't know is we don't fully understand this
Mm,
subtype, particularly for Black women. And that's because of clinical trials. When you look at a lot of the diagnosis as well as the data that we have, the molecular data that we have, it's from white women.
mm,
And so we need to understand a lot more about the subtype that Black women have. Why do they have it? What's the molecular basis of this? We don't have a lot of genomic profiling. We don't really understand. And that's again because a lot of them were not on clinical trials. You only have about 5% of Black women on clinical trials, yet they make up 13%
wow.
of the population. So understanding that so that we can create the right medicines to treat it is a big challenge. And then the second challenge is in terms of getting diagnosed or getting diagnosed later. And that's a whole different a different challenge. And I guess you'd ask why, why is there a delay in diagnosis? And a lot of it is in terms of education, in terms of access to practitioners, and this multifactorial. But if I think about why the increase and why increase in incidence and the increase in death, to me, they really fall into those two buckets, really having the more aggressive form and not understanding it enough to actually create the right medicines. And the second is the delayed in diagnosis and access, the third really access to treatment.
Sure. And, and that's something that we have talked about in those clinical trials and, historical data of things, that are being tested. And it's like that population doesn't even get this kind of cancer or isn't, predisposed. Like, let's shift the gears. So, what efforts are underway to ensure that women of color are more represented in these clinical trials?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And I have to tell you, so being in pharma for over a decade, and I'll leave it there, a decade plus, there has been a big shift. And in terms of efforts to enroll Black, Latino, and actually more underrepresented women and men of color. If I even take a step back, I don't know if I've said this out loud before, but I remember even in med school and me raising a flag where I saw risk factor for death. And it just had like certain things like hypertension, cancer rates, breast cancer, all these different things, Black race. And I used to wonder, how can a race be and have an increased risk of death? And it didn't say why, it just said it is because. Now, to your point, clinical, I think we're starting to see those stats more when it comes to breast cancer, when it comes to your point, endometrial cancer. And when you're saying, how can a race have twice the mortality rate of another race? There has been a big push to increase the representation in clinical trials so that we can understand it more. And in pharma, I would say beyond GSK, across pharma, there has been a ton of money. So I don't think it's just the questions being asked, but I'm starting to see a lot of investments in trying to raise awareness and trying to do something about it. Previously, the biggest challenge was, obviously, we all know there is historical reasons why there is mistrust between the medical community and really African Americans. And a lot of people talk about Tuskegee, but it goes so far beyond Tuskegee. But the biggest challenge was a lot of people said, well, it's a mistrust issue, so there's nothing we can do about it. But when you start really going deeper, yes, there's a mistrust issue, but it's so much more than that. It's practical things. It's the study designs, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So again, the way I think about it is you have actually the study itself doesn't allow for a lot of Black participation because some of the eligibility criteria automatically eliminates them. A lot of the baseline labs were done, again, a lot at the standards for either white males or white females. And sometimes, based on ethnicity and race, there may be differences in terms of what baseline is normal. So again, those things, a lot of it had automatically eliminated, particularly women of color. And then when it comes to the consent forms, it's done in a specific way, and there are cultural differences in terms of the way people interpret information, the way people make decisions. And a lot of those weren't taken into consideration. And then the other piece that to me was a big challenge was even being offered clinical trials. There was a study done that was presented at ASCO when it came to women with breast cancer. 80% of women said, Black women, if they were offered a clinical trial, they would jump on it. 40% of them only were offered the clinical trial. So we know there's some real implicit biases or assumptions made that these women would not participate in a clinical trial, and therefore they weren't even offered the clinical trial. And then the last bucket is the practicality to me in terms of challenges. A lot of the centers that run clinical trials are in academic centers that a lot of times are not in the community. So a lot of times, beyond not offering, they didn't have access to these trials. access to transportation. When someone is diagnosed with cancer, they're not waiting to be diagnosed. They have their lives that they're living. So how do you stop what you're doing to go 30 or 40 miles to this center? So there are so many different factors that prevent women of color from getting on these trials that goes beyond just a trust issue. And right now is where I started to see people addressing them one by one. So there's a lot that we're doing, and I guess we could talk about it a little bit later and how we're doing it, but there's a lot that we're doing to address each one of those pieces so that we can make sure that we increase the enrollment of Black women in clinical trials, including making sure that their physicians are actually equipped with a clinical trial so that they can get on it.
Are there ways that we are training medical professionals, and are there ways that that folks who are in the know and aware of these disparities and are trying to make headway, are they getting it out to the masses where the physicians are, and where those communities are, so that they're more aware and are better trained, so that, like you said, they are offering this, and it's not just making an assumption that, oh, they can't make it, or oh, they can't do this, and actually giving that opportunity.
Yeah, so if we want to talk about the awareness piece, like I said, that's kind of my middle bucket in terms of making sure physicians are offering them. So the first piece is recognizing all of us have our own implicit biases, all of us, right? It's just based on what we know, and we make quick decisions without a lot of facts, and we have to do that to operate. So I think that one of the big push that we're doing is making sure that physicians are trained in terms of clinical trials and people of color, making sure they understand the data, making sure they're trained on how to offer these trials, making sure they're trained on actually the disparities. So at GSK, we offer a lot of these trainings. And actually, if you're going to be a part of our clinical trials, you now need to be trained on this. And when I look at cross pharma, a lot of pharmaceutical companies are requiring training in terms of unconscious biases. How do you offer clinical trials based on diverse populations? How do you be more culturally competent? So that's one thing. But then I also think the second piece is making sure patients themselves and the communities are educated. And like programs like yours are critical to do that. And I mean, that's why I was so excited to come on your show, because I think the reach that you have and the education that you're providing is so important. How do we go into to the community centers and make sure that the communities understand these disparities? Because I think if people understand this is a healthcare crisis. It is a crisis when you have a race of people dying at twice the rate of others. It's a healthcare crisis when you have a group of people who their diagnosis is being delayed. You have a healthcare crisis where patients, we don't even understand the details of their genomic profile because we don't have the data. It is a healthcare crisis where they're not even coming to clinical trials so that we can develop the right medicines for them. And I think the more we shine a light on this within their community, from a grassroots level, from a patient advocacy level, from those that have a voice that reaches the masses, as well as the physicians, to empower those patients, I think we won't make a change. So I think it's a a concerted effort from physicians to the community, to people like you, grassroots, to their community centers, to wherever they get their information from. Let's make sure that everyone understands that this is a true healthcare crisis that we need to address.
Yeah. And so that's, kind of leads me into my next question. So, we've talked about the physicians and we're educating them, and that's awesome. But on the other hand, you also have, and like you talked about, the trust issue, and it goes beyond that, but the community. So what can medical practitioners or other people in the community do to increase awareness amongst those underrepresented communities, to enhance disease understanding and the importance of participating in these clinical trials?
Part of the challenge is a lot of their physicians that they trust, that they go to in their community, are not even offered the clinical trials. And one of the things that I think is going to be really important is, as a drug developer, making sure that we are contributing to upskilling those physicians in their community. Let's bring the education into those communities so that the physicians are educated about the data. They're educated about the first signs of endometrial cancer. They know
Mm-hmm.
what to say to those patients. And let's offer those, let's upskill them so that we can actually offer them those clinical trials. So the clinical trials can be brought into the community instead of taking away from the community and have those patients leaving their community. So let's bring the clinical trials to the physicians that they actually trust. And I am betting you, if we can actually take it into their community, you'll have a big increase. There's some data that shows, it's very interesting. Again, from the breast cancer data that I told you in terms of those patients that actually would want to be on a clinical trial, there are data that shows when they're offered clinical trials, they actually join the clinical trials. So it's not for a lack of not wanting to join. It's being offered. So my biggest focus is, how can I take these trials and put it into their communities? How can we make sure those physicians are skilled to run clinical trials? And how do we make sure we meet those patients where they are instead of having them leave their community? So I think that's a big piece that a lot of us are not yet addressing, but I think it would move the needle tremendously.
Yeah, well, and as a layperson, I think, I mean, I'm just kind of shocked that not all physicians have access to these clinical trials. And thinking about it, okay, so you're not educated in this part, or you don't have this training or whatever, but it's just one of those things where it blows my mind that it's not, you're a physician, you have access to this. And so, that we need to, but you're right, these practitioners are in their communities, and people trust, their doctor who they've seen for years and years, and who birthed their babies, and, who all of these things. And so I think you're absolutely right. We need to take it to where these communities are, and that bypasses the trust. You don't have to earn trust. You just have to bypass it and get to the people who they already trust.
Exactly. So that's where there's a big push for us in GSK. And like I said, it's not just GSK. It's biopharma in general. What I'm noticing is we are really trying to get into those communities now. And over the last 3 years, we've been really successful in opening trials inside the communities, whether they're satellite sites or they're new sites. But that's a big focus for us. When you look at even a lot of the data, most trials are offered, like I said, in the academic centers. For us, we've kind of flipped it on its head, and about 75% of our trials are actually in the community. Wow. And we are seeing a huge increase in African-American enrollment in our trials because of, not only because of that, but that is one of the factors that's contributing. And until that happens, I think the other piece is, how do we create practical solutions? So making sure that their physicians are informed, and until they're able to get on trials, how do we make sure that we equip the patients with resources so that they can travel? Think about, again, for endometrial cancer, a woman who is working, she may have her kids, she has her day-to-day stuff, and I'm asking you now to travel 10 miles out. I'm asking you to donate a lot of time, go back and forth to do labs. How can I relieve a lot of your burden? And so, there are things such as helping to finance the commute, finance your food, finance just the little things that are required of you to be a part of these clinical trials, so that we can relieve a lot of those logistical burdens, because it's a lot. It's a lot for us to expect someone to understand the diagnosis, accept the diagnosis, do their day-to-day stuff, and then have an additional burden. So we're doing all that we can to alleviate a lot of those, I guess, the practical day-to-day things that we have to go through. So I think if we can, as a community, tackle both, where we are relieving their day-to-day burden so that they can join these clinical trials, and we can get more data so that we can develop the right drugs, educate them, and also upskill the physicians in their communities so that they can run the clinical trials. Those two alone, I think, would move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there something that, if a woman is diagnosed but feels that she is receiving subpar care, or feels that she's not receiving opportunities like this, what can an individual do if they find themselves in that situation?
so it breaks my heart when you hear people actually feel that way. But the positive thing is that they recognize that they deserve better.
Mm,
And and that's the first step, knowing that you are entitled to be to get the best treatment, the best education, and you're empowered to do all that you can to do so. So
yeah.
I think what can she do? I think the first thing is understand that Google is not a doctor, because sometimes Google is scarier than anything else. All of a sudden you start seeing all
Right.
these different symptoms and all, and you think you have a whole other different thing going on. Um,
Right.
but I think I mean, what I love about different patient advocacy groups and different patient navigators is that they're about that person diagnosed with the disease and seeing the whole person. And they have
Mm,
so many things to offer to make sure that they're thinking about the whole person, not just the disease. So I think
yeah.
the first thing that I would always recommend is find a patient advocacy group and a
Mm,
patient navigator, because they have so many resources available to them. Start there, because, and then on top of that, because then you start getting a lot of different support pieces. They have access to educational tools, emotional support, which is to me so important.
yeah.
Again, pragmatic solutions, pragmatic support.
Hmm.
They can help you find clinical trials in your area. They can help you navigate your patient navigator can help you navigate. Find other people who've been diagnosed too, who've been
Hmm.
through it. Um, but the most important thing is getting in that driver's seat and then finding, and this is really important, finding a doctor that you feel comfortable with, finding a doctor that you feel understands what you're going through, find a doctor that you feel comfortable sharing with.
Hmm.
There's no excuse for a physician not to really try to understand a patient and what they're going through, but there's some that just don't. And
Yeah.
so match is so important. Finding a physician that you truly trust, where both of you
Mhm.
together are making the decisions or helping, well, that person's helping you make the right decision for yourself. Because one of the things I like to tell my team is people, patients are people diagnosed with a disease, and we are heterogeneous. We have different needs, different
Mhm.
desires, and different desires, even in terms of outcome. It is important for a physician not to impose his or her outcome on you.
Mhm.
So getting a physician that understands what you want
Yep.
and then helping you come up with the optimal treatment for that, to me,
Mhm.
is so critical. So patient navigators, advocacy groups, making sure you're really well plugged in, understanding what options are available to you. And then the most important piece is finding that physician. I don't care if you have to go to 2 or 3 physicians until you find that physician. Your health is everything.
It's worth it.
It's
Yeah. Well, and
worth it.
we've talked about that um in terms of um finding, a second opinion, a third opinion, and how sometimes, myself included, it's, well, am I going to hurt the doctor's feelings if I go for a second opinion? And it's like, honey, it doesn't matter if you hurt their feelings. First off, they're professionals and they're used to this. But secondly, your health is paramount and you
Yes.
need to make sure that you're putting it first. And if you don't even just like vibe with that doctor, or you get, a feeling, or you're like, I don't love that plan, I want to see if there's something else, you need to do it. And, for my cancer in particular, it was relatively slow growing. I learned later. And so it wasn't an aggressive form of cancer. And so I went from diagnosis on Tuesday, first oncology appointment on Friday. The next Tuesday, I had my hysterectomy. And so I felt kind of rushed into that. And looking back, I don't have any regrets. It was absolutely the right decision for me. But I do wish I had talked to another physician, had a second opinion, taken a little bit more time with that. And so I think it's really important, like you said, to make sure that the doctor isn't imposing what they want on you. Because looking back, that's very much what happened in my circumstance. And so that really resonates with me of, no, you need to find somebody who is going to work with you, listen to you,
Yes.
and help you achieve your desired outcome.
Yeah, I cannot underscore that more. Like, that is so important. And to your point, hurting a physician's feeling, let me be clear, medicine is a service profession. It
Mm,
is a service. We are serving you. This is what, I mean, when I went into medicine, that's what when you decide to go, that's what you're doing. And
Right.
if what I'm doing is not serving and meeting your needs, it's not about me. It's about
Hmm.
you and what's in your best interest. And so never be afraid, never feel bad that the service that I'm providing is not meeting your needs. You are the person who I am serving, and you deserve the service that meets your needs. Always, 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 always. So if I can say that loudly and clearly from a physician, from a drug developer, from a patient, like, I want all of your listeners to know, we are providing you a service. If our service isn't meeting your need, it's time to go to someone else whose service will. It is your life. And that is the most important thing.
Yes, you only have one. You know, we need to protect it. We need to. Oh man, that really resonates with me. So thank you for saying that, especially from a physician's perspective, right? That you've been there, you understand, and to hear that physicians go into practice to serve and to help, and so that's really what you're there for. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of that, especially in an emotional time like a cancer diagnosis and things like that. So keeping in mind that finding those communities and also trusting your gut and knowing that maybe you need that second opinion, because if you don't trust your physician to be helping you to find your desired outcome, you're gonna kind of be wary all the way along. And so that trust is really the foundation of good treatment.
Yeah, I can say even now. I mean, obviously, like, my physicians know that I'm a physician, and so, but it's funny because sometimes I'll keep asking them questions until I feel comfortable. There are things, right? Like, and there are times some of them would start laughing because they're like, "Well, Tanya, you're going to continue to ask the questions." Oh yeah, yeah, because I need all this information
Hmm.
before I make a decision. Now I can look it up and I can do the research, but we're having this discussion, and I need to make sure I am comfortable
Yep.
before I say yes or no. And that's the same thing with your listeners. And I can tell you there are times when patients would have me ask questions for about an hour, and then I'm like, you know what? Then go home and come back and we can talk. We'll continue to
Hmm.
talk until we get to a point where you feel comfortable with the decision that you are about to make. And
Right.
I will provide you with all the facts. I'll provide you with whatever information you need.
Hmm.
But let's not move forward until I know you're comfortable with this decision. And we may have to move fast, but I am here to answer those questions. And you deserve that. You deserve it.
Right. Right. And I think um, you saying to the patient, you deserve it, to make sure that they understand that, you are not a cog in a wheel, right? Like you are important, and your diagnosis is just as devastating as this person's diagnosis, and your outcome is just as important as somebody else's diagnosis, regardless of your background, your ethnicity,
Yeah.
your heritage. It is important, and you are a person who we care about, who we want to live through this, because
Yeah.
ultimately that's what we want to save lives.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, even now, my hat for as a clinical researcher, I mean, that's where I think why sometimes, I mean, I get a little frustrated and sad because I don't think even clinical studies are presented in a way to patients for them to understand is so important. One of the things we've been trying to do is create tailored, we keep talking about this personalized medicine, this personalized
Hmm.
approach. Um, Again, thinking about what I like to call patient-centered drug development, a patient-driven science.
Hmm.
Um, the person diagnosed with disease should be driving our science, should be driving the drugs that we develop. We
Mm.
should not just develop drugs and retrofit them back into, right? Retrofit patients into the drug itself.
Yeah.
We should be developing the drugs based on the needs of that patient. So
Hmm.
in order to create personalized medicine, we need patients to come on these clinical trials so that we can truly understand their disease, understand their heterogeneous needs, and develop the drugs to meet them. And so when I look at, to your point earlier about endometrial cancer and why is it that now you have twice the mortality rate, and there's so many unanswered questions that the more a patient can understand they have a right to join a clinical trial, they have a right to make sure we're developing the right medicines for them.
Hmm.
um, the more they understand that, I think the more we can tailor our medicine and really develop the right medicines for patients living with endometrial cancer, diagnosed with endometrial cancer.
Absolutely, 100%. Shifting gears a little bit, September is Gynecologic Cancer Awareness Month. We are so proud of that. And September 20th is World Gynecologic Oncology Day, or World Go Day. So this year's theme, we understand, is Go for Testing. So what types of testing can help improve outcomes of the treatment journey for patients? And what kind of testing are we focusing on for this gynecologic oncology awareness?
So just in general, I mean, first of all, I'm so happy that Go for Testing is the theme, because again,
Yes.
now we're talking about personalized medicine. We've developed just in general so many different medicines based on our understanding of different mutations and even different prognostic factors of different mutations. So the more people are tested earlier, the more we can understand what your risk factors are. So things like a really easy one is like the BRCA testing, right? So people call it BRCA testing, but we know the risk factors now if you have this gene, and we know we'll continue to monitor you for certain things and make certain decisions based on that. So improve your chances of survival, decrease your risk of even developing cancer. So something like that, just going in for testing, understanding your status, your genetic status can help prevent or diagnose early different types of cancer. So that's one of the things that we are really pushing for. And quite frankly, I think the more people get tested, the more we even learn about different mutations and different genetic predispositions. A lot of things that we learned is actually from just looking at different mutations, then correlating it with different cancers, and then develop treatments for it. So the more people can get tested, the more we even can do more genomic profiling, the more drugs we can develop that actually address those challenges. So I think there's an immediate benefit, and there's a futuristic benefit. So the immediate benefit is get tested, and then let us see if we can identify certain things early so that we can take the right preventative measures. And then the second piece is we can understand a lot more and hopefully develop the right medicines for different molecular profiles that we have not yet developed the right medicines for. But in the future, we can. The more we learn, the more we can correlate with different cancers, the better drugs we can develop. So I am so excited that is a big focus, because I think it's going to help us stay, and it's going to help us in the future to really do optimal personalized medicines.
Do you see a future where, this genetic testing is just done in adolescence, right? It's along with your standard immunizations that you're getting. It's like, you're going to get your DNA test.
Imagine that
in the future.
You know what? Here's the thing. I actually think that's ideal. I don't think many people think it yet, because people are saying now you're going to violate, you're coming in, you're violating and there's too many unknowns. However, the more we're educated about genetic testing, the more people can see the preventative measures that can be taken, the more we can actually develop the right medicines for different mutations. I actually think we will get there in the future where people can see the benefit and therefore understand it's important to test these earlier. Now, a lot of times we'll test in adolescent medicine or even in pediatrics earlier on if there's a family history.
Sure.
So we've already started doing that, decades ago. But now I think in the future that will be ideal, because we are developing medicine based on mutations and understanding understanding the nuances of diseases. I think we're going to get there very soon. And I actually think medicine is going to improve based on that. I think we're going to learn a lot. We're going to develop a lot more personalized medicine. I think we're going to do a better job in addressing specific diseases a lot early. So hopefully we'll be doing that sooner than later in my lifetime, in your lifetime. just as a routine approach. Routine, you test for certain things, you give your immunization, and you check for different genomic profiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just like you get your eye test, you go in and get your hearing tested, you gotta go get your blood tested. Or swab your cheek, whatever it is.
You know what? Your regular labs, right? You do your regular labs in general, plus your genetic testing. Now, remember, again, we are doing basic testing, but we are not doing bona fide genetic testing to really look at all the different genetic markers that have the potential to cause diseases, and so that we can get it early, start preventing it early.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, where can people look for more information if this sparks an interest, or and what can people do in their own communities or to help other communities? What's a call to action here for our listeners?
Definitely patient advocacy. I cannot emphasize that enough. For anyone who has been diagnosed, or actually, if you have not been diagnosed, if you know someone has been diagnosed with endometrial cancer, if you have a family member, if you just want more information, I would definitely say reach out to patient advocacy groups, because they just have a plethora of information and the right people that can guide you through it. The other call to action is just this mindset, understanding that you are empowered. This is your life. You are the ultimate decision maker. The rest of us are here to serve you and help you through it. But in the end, it is your decision, and you deserve the best care possible. So if those two things, if that's all I leave you with, that's the third one, sorry. Join a clinical trial if you can, and if it's available. The more information that we have, first of all, it's obviously innovative therapies come from clinical trials, and the more information we have, the more we can develop the right medicines. So those are the three things: patient advocacy, know that you're in control of your health and you deserve the best. And the third, if you can, join a clinical trial so we can continue to develop the right medicines for you.
Absolutely. Now, is that something a patient, if they are not offered any clinical trials, is that something that they can ask their physician for?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Ask them. And actually, what I do recommend is when you go speak to your physician, sometimes it's hard to remember all the things you want to ask them when you're there. Yeah. So if you can write down all your questions before, come prepared.
Oh man, if my mom was here, she would just be praising because she takes a little notebook to every doctor's appointment, and she has her questions, and she has, like, when she was going through my cancer and other things, she had questions for the doctors about me. So yes, we are advocates for ask the questions, come prepared, make sure that you are putting your health first and that you're advocating for yourself, because not every doctor will, and not every situation you're in will people put you at the top when that's where you need to be when it's your health is concerned.
Absolutely. You should be at the top. And physicians are human. They have good ones, you have bad ones, right? But this is your life, your health, and you own it. So I love it. So your mom, I completely agree with her.
I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Small. It has been just amazing to hear about everything that you are pushing forward, and the moves that you're making and the waves you're making in helping to identify why underrepresented communities, specifically Black women, are so disadvantaged when it comes to being diagnosed and being treated and living through endometrial cancer. And so we applaud what you're doing and are so excited to help share this message. And so this is going to go up before World Gynecologic Oncology Day. And so we'll post it all out. And we are just so, so grateful for you and what you're doing. And also that you just took some time out today to share with our listeners, because it's an important message. And we know that it needs to get out and be spread far and wide.
Well, thank you. And this is really, really, really dear to my heart. I mean, like I said, this is a healthcare crisis to me that I want to do all I can to help with. So thank you for having me and for just listening to my thoughts on this. And thank you to your
Absolutely.
audience. Whatever I can do, just let me know. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Down There Aware. Be sure to like and subscribe on our new YouTube channel, as well as on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us at Down There Aware on all social media sites: Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. If you have it, we're there at Down There Aware. You can learn more on our website, www.downthereaware.com, and always get in touch with us, downthereaware@gmail.com. See you next week.